Hi everyone, today I'll be talking about observational study in AP statistics. So, we first have the features of an observational study. An observational study have no factors manipulated or assigned because an observational study we only observe the people and the data collected. It only shows association without cause and effect because cause and effect would only be an experiment. And there will be two types of observational study. The first one will be retrospective, which means, retro means the past, so we're collecting data from the past. And prospective, with pro meaning forward, so we will collect data as the events unfold. Next, we will have the types of samples. So, as you may know, observational study equals survey. So, the types of sample would be mainly these types with simple random sample or SRAS. This will be the most common and effective or useful way, so we want to use this every single time. And then we have stratified random sample. Stratified means that it's basically grouping the population first and then using simple random sample to sample them. And this is really important because stratified random sample would only be used when we assume or think there's variance. So when we assume or think there's variance in the population, we want to group the samples first. The third one will be cluster, which means that in a group of population, you randomly select a few big groups in the population and you survey everyone in those big groups. So the key is sample all individuals in each cluster. The cluster will be random, obviously. You will use the same way for simple random sample to get the random clusters. One more will be the convenience sample. This is bad. We don't want this. This means that you're just surveying people that it's the most convenient for you to survey, for example, your friends and family. This will really produce bias. And the last one will be multi-stage sample, which means that you're basically doing stratified, you're grouping people, but then in those groups, you're grouping them again. In a big group, you do 2, and then maybe you do 4, and then you survey these individuals. So you're doing more than one stage to survey, to sample people. So that's why it's called multi-stage sample. This could also be for a cluster sample. You might randomly select clusters and then in those clusters randomly select other clusters. And after this, we will have bias. So bias is super important. Bias basically means there will be a systematic over or under representation of a population parameter. So when you have to write about a sampling bias, this will be really important in FRQs. So you will first have to identify what's the population parameter and the sample. Remember, population parameter is what your sample should represent. And if there is bias, that means the sample couldn't fully or accurately represent the population parameter. Second, you will explain how the sample individuals are different from the general population, which is basically why this bias exists or is in effect. And the third, we will explain how this will lead to an over and underestimate of the population parameter. And then lastly, we will have the types of survey bias. The first one, again, we have wording bias, this basically means the surveyor or the researcher asks questions in a way that makes the respondents biased towards one answer instead of the other. And then we have voluntary response bias, which basically means that those that voluntarily respond have strong opinions. So this would mean that the survey is not mandatory for everyone, so it's voluntary, so those that will respond may be more extreme or in favor of one thing than another, and those who will not respond may be neutral. This would make the estimate of the population be more extreme than it should be, and therefore overestimate the population and overrepresent it. And then we have response bias. So response bias is basically that people may lie or change answers. For example, if you ask a question that's really private, then people might not choose the answer truthfully. And obviously, we also have non-response bias. Non-response bias is just people don't respond. People don't respond, and because they don't respond, we can't get their answers, which may underestimate the population parameter because what they think might be really important. And lastly, we have undercoverage bias, which basically means that you're not surveying enough people. And these people might have a different opinion than those that are surveyed. So you will again underestimate or underrepresent the population parameter. So these are the most important things to know for surveys and observational study in general. Thank you.